Violet Evergarden is a series about the struggle that everyone faces in communicating their emotions. Its titular protagonist was raised as a child soldier without a family, and only learned how to read, write, and appreciate things outside of battle when under the command of someone who tells her to live on and be free before he dies protecting her. Only newly attempting to understand emotions, Violet embarks on a journey to learn what it means when someone says "I love you," as her commander did to her in his final moments. Communication is a struggle for Violet, as she finds that people will often lie, contradict themselves, or betray their own intentions in their speech. These are all things that most people inherently realize and expect because they have encountered that type of communication all throughout their lives. But Violet has never needed to account for anything more than taking the clearest and most concise possible orders. Her sense of happiness or self-worth came from performing the orders she was given to the best of her abilities because there simply wasn't anything else of definition in her life. At age 14, with her commander dead and her arms shot off, then replaced with Fullmetal Alchemist Automail, she comes to work as a woman of letters, or as they're known in this world, an auto-memory doll, meaning someone who meets with customers in order to reinterpret and transcribe their feelings into words. It could not be a less fitting career for Violet, whose tendency is to take what someone says at face value and then to put it in even more strictly straightforward terms in her writing, creating a blunt and militaristically curt tone. Meeting Violet Evergarden tends to go the same way for most people. Her demeanor puts them off in some way, but then they become aware of her hands, immediate evidence of some kind of trauma beyond anything they could imagine having had to deal with at her apparent age. This contrast between how someone who encounters her wants to feel and how they're made to feel by the sight of the hands puts them off balance and leaves them curious and cautious in their interactions, usually leading to realizations that Violet is very sincere in her desire to achieve clear communication and to fulfill her mission, but just not very good with nuance. Violet's bluntness has many unsung benefits. She is prone to immediately resolving misunderstandings by simply sharing the information which participants are pointlessly withholding for whatever emotional reasons. Because she can adapt to situations quickly, she does pretty well navigating the fallout of these minor infractions of trust and only rarely makes someone angry enough to get into a fight with her. Because Violet works directly with the people whom she's trying to interpret, and the situations that she gets called in to navigate are often emotionally intense, they do usually come to an understanding of some kind which leads to mutual benefit. The commissioner gets the letter that they want, and Violet learns a little bit more about how emotions work, and how she can incorporate her new understandings into future communication. When she isn't learning through the job, Violet spends a lot of her time reading books to try and figure out through sheer exposure the trends and the ways that people feel about and react to things. This blunt force approach to learning empathy was particularly relatable to me as someone who only started crossing the bridge from wanting people to understand me into wanting to understand people around the back end of my teens. I started asking people questions like, "What do you do for fun?" and "How do you get ready in the morning?" and basically living like a Google SEO bot. Then I dedicated the rest of my life to media analysis and meeting people. Violet Evergarden's arc of getting better and better at her job to the point that she rapidly becomes famous for all sorts of reasons, which then effectively turns the show into a sort of less philosophical, more emotionally effervescent version of Kino's journey, was pretty fun to watch, and by the time you get to the first movie, people are calling her a prince, so you've got that too, but the show doesn't take its queer undertones much farther than an undertone. Structurally, Violet Evergarden leaves a lot of room for expansion, as it occasionally tells more personal stories of the characters or marks the progression of the setting, in between what mostly amount to emotional episodic stories about people trying to communicate their difficult feelings. It is here that I feel most tempted to measure the baseline experience of the show, because it usually hangs in about the same sort of atmosphere, balancing extremely slow and methodical emotional storytelling with huge swelling moments of drama. On the one hand, I find Violet Evergarden extremely effective at eliciting an emotional response. For instance, watching episode 10, I couldn't help but keep losing my shit the whole time because I could relate to the scenario, and pretty much every second of it was dedicated to pointing out the tragic elements of that scenario. But I found it overbearing. I didn't really find much reason to remember or care about the characters as people because there wasn't really anything to learn about them beyond their situation. I can appreciate the catharsis of being made to cry on some level, but whenever I watch these kinds of shows, of which Kyoto Animation has made plenty, where I feel like I'm being made to cry more because of how overpoweringly dramatic the presentation is than because of how emotionally harrowing the situation is, I find myself in the middle of a very bizarre and paradoxical cynicism. There were episodes and moments of Violet Evergarden which stimulated both sides of my brain at once, and they mostly tended to come in what I guess you might describe as the more plot-driven episodes. Much of the older cast has been left pretty mysterious by the end of the first season, and I am curious enough about those characters that I would check out a second one in hopes of learning more about them. But I would also be hoping that its episodic stories either grow more compelling, or even are expanded into their own mini-arcs in a way more similar to the first movie, which, while maybe not such a great story that it necessarily needed a whole 90-minute film, was still able to expand on its characters to enough of an extent that I remember them more than most of those that Violet met in Season 1. Having said that, the show also has a tendency to bring characters back continually, so maybe some of these people will get expanded on going forward. Whatever the case, I'm interested to see how the story will be continued in its upcoming second film, and whether Violet will face any challenges with the potential to redefine her character again in some way.